Hello, this is Sam and Jordan with the Cinema Scoop podcast, and we're going to be going over our top 5 each Martin Scorsese films.
Yes, we're going to count down from 5 to 1, and we're going to alternate between our lists, and then after we're done, we're going to go through our honorable mentions, and then we also wanted to talk about Killers of the Flower Moon, which just came out recently and is now on Apple TV. And we started it. We're past halfway. It was late when we started it, so we were to finish it soon.
Yeah, we'll call it that we're at like an intermission point, and it felt timely enough to be doing a Martin Scorsese top 5 kind of at this point. I guess we can't really talk about the movie yet just because we haven't fully seen it, but that's a long movie.
Yeah, I like it. I need to digest it more and obviously finish it, but I don't think it would be in the top 5.
Yeah, spoiler alert, it may not be in our top 5, but I don't know if that's a fair assessment considering we haven't seen
the whole thing. Okay, so my number 5 favorite Martin Scorsese film of all time is Goodfellas. This is from 1990. It surrounds the true story of Henry Hill, who's played by Ray Liotta, who just passed away recently. Rest in peace, Ray Liotta. Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, supporting characters. I've seen this a few times. I really like it. I love the overall story of the mafia and how Ray Liotta's character goes through the ranks of becoming one of the main figures. Joe Pesci, I believe, won the Oscar for this performance, and he's just really good. Robert De Niro is always good. I think some people might think this is his best or second best. I think it's just a notch below, like, other crime films like The Godfather and stuff like that, but I think it's unique enough and there's lots of moments that I find rewatchable.
Yeah, I just added it because I actually realized I don't have it rated at all. I think I've just seen it once a long time ago. So I just added it back to my list that's like movies I need to rewatch. It's one of those that like on Letterboxd, if I like don't have a rating for it, that just means like I either wasn't paying attention or I like need to re-see it. So yeah, I think it's definitely one that I ought to re-see. It's another Robert De Niro, Martin Scorsese cinematic universe film. That's like they're like a huge partnership through a lot of our favorites, I think. So my number 5 is different. My number 5 is Silence. And this came out in 2016. We saw this in theaters. This one is very difficult to watch. I remember being very sleepy because it was really, no surprise, but like this one's really long. But I remember thinking this is really, really good. Yeah, it's kind of like I don't know what you would call it. I feel like all Martin Scorsese movies are kind of like thrillers in a way, but this one's like a religious thriller. Truthfully, I think I was into the idea of this movie in 2016, not because I was a Martin Scorsese fan of any kind. Like, I think at that point I really wasn't into film or into watching movies, for a specific director. I think I did it as an Adam Driver, Andrew Garfield thirst watch and was like, wow, this is a really good thirst watch. They're not necessarily like adorable in this. They just are both really, really good.
Adam Driver's super skinny in this movie.
Yeah, this is his Pianist. Not the Pianist. What's the one where Christian Bale.
Machinist.
The Machinist.
Which I haven't seen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy, but this one I feel like I would want to rewatch if I was going to do like a Scorsese week. or something and like rewatch all of them. I don't know if like, again, it was kind of hard to watch just because there's a lot of kind of overt gore. But I think that's kind of the point of the movie, and frankly that's kind of the point of a lot of Scorsese movies. When there's gore involved, it's shocking. So yeah, what's your number 4?
Well, that's my number 4.
Oh.
Is Silence. Yeah, the only thing I'll add is, it's like one of those movies that's long, but once you get into it, it's kind of like you can escape into it. And if you really like want to mentally go through the spiritual questions the movie brings up, it's very interesting. They do like all the Japanese stuff, like being like the locations they shot at, and the cinematography of the ocean and the water is very good. I really liked how it ended, and this was like one of the first Martin Scorsese movies. Not the first one I saw, but one of like the newer ones after I kind of got more into movies.
That's how I feel about it too.
It kind of caught me at a good time. When I first saw it, and then when I rewatched it, it was still very good. So I think it's definitely worth revisiting.
I didn't know you rewatched it.
So what's your number 4?
My number 4, I think it'll be shocking that it's this low, but this is the highest it can get comparative to my number 1 through 3. It's Wolf of Wall Street. It is so incredibly rewatchable. It's one of the like fastest paced Scorsese movies, in my opinion, that I've seen, where, you know, it's kind of no surprise that like a lot of Scorsese movies are just like very long. They're usually long with a purpose, but I feel like this one is long and quick in like a very strange way. It kind of feels like you're on like cocaine or something the whole time, which I guess is the point of, you know, this guy's life and this guy's story, is to feel like live fast, die young, you know, party it up, spend a bunch of money. Like, I think that's kind of the point. This is also just like a very prolific film for Leo, and is probably Leo at his best. Also, Margot Robbie is like such a babe in this movie. It's like undeniable that this is like, and I'm not fact checking this, but I think this was probably one of her first like burst onto the scene type of movies before she got like massively popular like she is now.
Yeah, this was like her breakout.
Yeah. And well deserved. Like, she's very, very good in this movie. And like, I think my favorite scene in this entire movie is, and I need to rewatch this, but it's specifically this part where Leo is like on a bunch of drugs and he is trying to get to a payphone and his legs don't work. If you've seen it, you know exactly which scene I'm talking about, but it's just like the craziest bit of like body acting I've seen in a movie. Like, just so good. But yeah, I rewatched this a couple years back and was like, oh yeah, this is like really, really good. So yeah, that's my number 4.
Yeah, we might be talking about that soon again, because that's higher on my list. But my number 3 is After Hours.
It is also my number 3.
Yeah, we have very similar. I think we might have one that's different, but yeah, After Hours is kind of a smaller Scorsese film. It's only 97 minutes. It's in 1985, so it's kind of like right in the middle of all his starting out to be a known director. I just think it's infinitely rewatchable. Mm-hmm. It's one of those, like, one of those movies that is basically what you see on screen from a chronological time is almost like how much time is passing in the actual plot. It's like one night, basically.
It's another one night movie, which I love that. And that's not common for Scorsese. Like, it kind of is like, it's a shorter film, it's told in one night, and it's not like a crime thriller necessarily. Like, this is very atypical.
Yeah, the main character kind of just, like, vibes out and wanders around and goes from place to place, and ultimately he's trying to get a girl, but, like, he goes through a lot of hoops just to get back to where he was the day before, which that's why it's such a great one-off film, because you can rewatch it so many times. The way it ends is just so perfect and funny, and
I actually really like that it's kind of, like, I like the shtick in movies where it's just a person trying to do something and they keep failing miserably by, like, different strokes of bad luck, or like when you see that, and these are two very different movies, but, like, you see that sort of a little bit in Eyes Wide Shut, where he's, like, trying to obtain a costume, and then you see it a lot in very different movie, Jingle All the Way, where he's trying to get, like, a fucking doll. This is that type of shtick where you're just, like, watching a guy try to accomplish something and he keeps failing, and it's like he's just trying to do one thing, but, like, just different bad things keep happening. I don't know why that is so entertaining to me, but I don't know what the, like, that type of movie could be labeled as, but yeah, I find that, like, really funny for, like, comedic value.
Yeah, he's like he's like an everyday man where, like, you can relate to him very easily because he's not rich or poor. He's just, like, in the moment, and he's got a job that he's trying to escape, and he's trying to get a girl, and he's trying to figure out what he's doing, which is, like, 99% of everybody out there trying to figure out things. And I like it because, like, when you keep it in one time and place, it's easy to explore how the characters are motivated and what they're trying to do, and I really like the main character.
Yeah, I agree. Do you, we both had the shared number 3, so do you want to say your number 2?
Yeah, my number 2 is Wolf of Wall Street. This came out right before we got married, like a few weeks before.
Oh, really?
2013, and we got married early 2014. So I think I watched this soon before or after we got married, but the first time, and I mean, everything you said before, I think just the excess of it, the capitalism to the extreme, peak 1980s. It's like I haven't seen the original Wall Street movie, but I would assume this is pretty much the peak of men in suits talking about money and figuring out how to get sex and drugs and how to break the law
just, like,
without
hedonism.
Which is the point. Like, I think at the time this had the most F-bombs in the whole... And in a movie, it's, like, 3 hours long, so they say it, like, every 5 seconds, I feel like. But that's the point.
Yeah, like, it almost could be marketed as that. Like, oh, this movie has, like, the most F-bombs in cinema history. I think at one time it did. I think it's been usurped at this point. But the funny thing is that it's really doesn't bother you. Like, it's one of the rare movies where it's not... It's done excessively, but everything else in this movie is done excessively. And so it feels right. It doesn't feel forced. It feels like it's used as an everyday adjective for things by most of the characters. Like, it doesn't feel like my dad likes this movie. And it's like, most dads probably would be like, that's a lot of F-bombs. But, like, I think it says something that it's like, it works for the subject matter of the story, you know?
Jonah Hill's really funny.
Yeah.
I think there's a story where he, like, went up to Martin Scorsese and was like, I'll get paid nothing. Like, just put me in this movie. I can do it. And he got Oscar nominated.
It's crazy.
And, yeah, Leo was nominated, but he didn't win. But he should have won from this one. He
won for The Revenant later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my number 2, and I think Sam's going to talk about this at some point pretty soon, but my number 2 is one that Sam showed me this last year, and it is The Last Temptation of Christ. We've talked about this before, maybe not on the podcast, but I'm a huge Willem Dafoe fan, similar to how I like Harry Dean Stanton. If you have something with Willem Dafoe in it, I'm going to see it just for his like weird ass face. This one though, like I don't know how to describe it while I'm watching this movie. He disappears and like I don't really see Willem Dafoe anymore. Like he really does look like Jesus in this movie. And this is also like a movie that I think a lot of like traditional Christians don't like because it sort of, what's the right word? It like could be perceived as being like sacrilegious against the real true story of Jesus, when like I think the point of the story is that this is not an adaptation of the Bible. This is a very fictionalized account of most of what happens in the time of Jesus, with like a couple of practical considerations for questions that don't get answered in the Bible. Like, what if Jesus was tempted? Or what if Jesus wanted to live a different life? Or what if Jesus didn't want to go through with this? Like, we know it's written about that he didn't want to go through with it. Like, what was that like? And like the other piece of it too that I think is what really drove it home for me was like, how would or how did Jesus deal with people portraying his teachings incorrectly? And he's no longer around to be able to correct those teachings and those misteachings. And I think that's like what really made it like such a solid film for me. Yeah, I think that's like it in a nutshell for me.
Yeah, this is my number 1. So I'll just go ahead and talk about it and we can get to your number 1. But yeah, the first time I watched this was last year. So like this was a fairly new watch, and I didn't know too much about the like backstory of how it was made, and I just knew most mainstream Christians either don't like it or don't want to have anything to do with it for whatever reason. But it's, like you said, it's not based off the Bible. It's based off a fictionalized novel. And it's basically like, the best way I can describe it, especially if you're a Christian, is to like understand that in order for Jesus to actually be a real like thing, he had to be a human. Yeah. And I think so many people don't really understand that. They're just like, well, there's God, and I guess he had a son, Jesus, so Jesus, I guess, is God. And like, you can follow what the Bible says, obviously, but what this story is trying to portray and convey to the audience and to every human who's ever existed was, if you are a human and you're trying to tell every other human that you're actually from, like, you're
a deity,
you got like the prophecy power, and you like have the direct connection of God, and you're basically, or you are God in flesh or in human form. Like, how do you communicate that to people without them thinking you're insane? And like,
yeah,
which is part of this movie, is like, he's a 30-something-year-old man walking around in a desert, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I have to go tell everyone I'm God.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like, it's like it's oozing out of him. Like, he has to like yell and like preach and do these things because he's so like compelled. And yeah, like, I just think the way Scorsese tells the story and the imagery of how everything comes about, it's just really eye-opening, especially as a Christian. And like, I grew up a Christian my whole life, and so to watch this at 30-something years old for the first time, it's like, Wow, so it's like it gives you new perspective, and like
Yeah.
there's really nothing at all negative you can really associate it with if you're like trying to nitpick the religious aspects of it, because like it's not trying to retell the Bible. Like the Bible's like trying to be an historic eyewitness testimony of like what the four disciples saw, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and like this was Jesus, this is what happened, this is all the miracles he did, blah blah blah. And like Jesus didn't actually write the Bible, right? So like to understand that a human declared himself to be God and did all these things in it's a very short time too. Like we're talking like a few years, I guess, where he's like, I'm God, let me tell you about all this stuff, and then I die, basically. And I just think it's so fascinating to continue to. I've already seen it 2 or 3 times this past year, so like I've already
That tells you
rewatched it.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, Willem Dafoe is fantastic, and I like the element you mentioned of like towards kind of the end part where like at what point does the human version of Jesus die and what's left is the God element of him, and then all the words he said and how people interpret those words and what happened. And I just think it's very like it's like I could keep going, but
It's really, really good. I really want to re-see it because I think I've only seen it the one time with you, but like bear in mind, I think you had seen it the week before. I was on a work trip and you were like, I will rewatch this at any given moment. You just say the word. And I was like, okay, it's clear that this is going to be a really good movie. I think the other piece of this too, for anybody listening that's like maybe not religious, is that like, I think this is a great movie to discuss spirituality and to discuss belief. Very much not specific to Christianity. Like, of course, that's the backdrop, but I think that, like, this is, like, maybe not a great thing for maybe Christian listeners to hear or whatever, but, like, atheists and agnostic people love this movie. If that tells you anything.
If you don't believe, it's way easier to just watch this as a movie and be like, oh, this is a great movie and an interesting take or whatever. But if you're, like, depending on what you were brought up in and actually believe, you're gonna have to like set all that aside and just watch it for what it is and understand it's a fictional story and it's a movie, and anything that you like actually believe within yourself, like that's great.
Yeah, well,
but that's not what this is about. It's what is on the screen, and
well, I think
it's
like
worth interpreting it differently than what you might think about.
Yeah, well, I think less than that even. It's just like, this is a great parable for explaining some of the fallacy that lies in religion.
Yeah,
regardless
overall.
of what religion you are. Like, that's what I mean by anybody could enjoy this, is because it's like a masterpiece depiction of like exactly what the trouble is with deciding what it is you believe and sticking to that, and the doubt that comes with that. And like, I think like just the fact that Willem Dafoe as Jesus in this movie is like blessed with, you know, divine spirituality of like, you are the son of God. There is so much doubt that he like masterfully shows. And yeah, I think it's like incredible because I feel like that like doubt that he shows in the movie is like a feeling of doubt that everybody has felt at any point in their life.
And I think a lot of Christians like have trouble grasping that, but it's like that's the point, is if Jesus was human, he had to have had all these human emotions that we all feel.
Yeah.
And it makes him more of a understandable character, so that if you do actually believe in the religious part of it, then I feel like it strengthened my faith just by watching this movie and thinking more about, well, how did Jesus actually feel like as a human? And I think it's just a universal story of like humanity in general. Like,
exactly.
Even if you don't even care about the Christian religion or any religion and you just want to watch this as a movie and character study on humans, it's like and even just the concept of God, like to think if there was a God and he wanted all of humans to understand that there's a God, how would that communication process happen? Like it's one thing to be like, oh, there's a sun and all the stars and all the nature that's created, so that's like a great example of God showing that he exists. But like to use a human to say to other humans, this is what God is, take it or leave it, and then, well, how do other humans grapple with that and believe it or not believe it? It's fascinating.
Yeah. Clearly we like this movie because we've talked about it for so long. I do have like 2 more things to say about it. They're just more funny things. Harvey Keitel's accent in this movie is absolutely ridiculous. Like,
his hair is so... He's got, like, red curly hair. It
yeah.
makes no sense for everybody else in the movie.
He talks like he's in a Scorsese gangster movie in this movie. And I love it. And then the second thing is that... I don't think this is a spoiler because everybody knows the story of Jesus, I think, at this point. I think we're past the spoiler zone on Harry Potter and the story of Jesus at this point. Like, if you just don't know, then I don't know how you don't know. But Jesus dies, if you didn't know. And there's a specific line that Willem Dafoe says where he says, "It is accomplished." And that is the most quotable thing, like, for weeks after we saw this. Every time Sam and I would do something that required the slightest, like, amount of effort, we would be like, "It is accomplished."
Yeah, because he says it right before he dies, so it's like an exhaustion breath, and how he says it, so it's really funny in a meme sense.
So that was your number 1.
So what's your number? I already know what your number 1 is, but...
And you've still got to do your number 2?
No, I'm done.
We've already done all yours. Okay.
Your number 1's an honorable mention for me.
Oh my gosh.
It's just outside number 5.
Okay, this one just... my number 1 is Taxi Driver. I love this movie so much. And I saw both of these at, like... Well, I saw Last Temptation of Christ and Taxi Driver around the same time, and I kept drawing parallels between them that I don't think maybe a lot of people do. Not saying Travis Bickle by any means is like, you know, the Son of God, and I'm not saying the Son of God is a raging incel, but like, I think if you were to not have to think about it in terms of like, that seems impossible, how could you compare the two? If you like just look at it at a very like, I guess like persona aspect, like they're both very similar in vibe of feeling like I'm called to do something, but nobody believes me, and I don't know how to execute this plan. And one plan could be seen as good in Last Temptation of Christ, you know, dying for other people's sins. In this one, it's sort of like a delusion state of like feeling as though they're meant to do something bigger with themselves, but not really being sure how to do it, and then going about it in all of the wrong ways, like a la like psychotic shooting. But like I don't know how to explain why I love this movie so much, because it is like the most bad vibes ever. Like it has like the saddest, most baddest vibes, and like the most unlikable, irredeemable main character. But there's just like something really beautiful about the way that it's shot. And I also think like not all great movies have likable, I want to root for you protagonists. And I think this is a great example where you don't want to root for the main character. You don't really want to be the main character. It's sort of like, it's more of like a warning. Like it's more of like, this is all of the worst possible case scenarios piled up into one person. You know, PTSD, isolation, no companionship, definitely has like an alcohol problem. Like it's all the like a perfect storm of like the worst possible things that can happen to a person. And I think at the time it was probably so highly regarded because of they were able to loop in the aspect of like, well, he's a veteran, and so this is what happens to veterans that aren't cared for. And I think that's a really great way for people to maybe understand this movie, is that like no, Travis Bickle is not like likable, but you should feel for him in a way that is like, there are people out there that go through this, not because of being bad people necessarily. But I also think like there's just like a lot of iconic parts in this movie that just make it, for me, like the best Scorsese movie, because I don't know for a fact, but I feel like this is what, like, if you were to ask most people, like, name a Scorsese movie, they'll probably say this or Wolf of Wall Street. As far as like the most prolific Scorsese movie. And this is like one of his earliest ones. Mm-hmm. So, definitely like pretty critically acclaimed too.
Yeah, I really like it. It's just there's elements of it that are not really fun to revisit and fun to rewatch. So that's why it's not quite in my top 5. But
yeah, yeah, for sure. There's like tough bits that are like not enjoyable to revisit. But I also feel that way about Silence and a lot of other movies, but yeah.
So a few honorable mentions, because that was one of my honorable mentions. I also have The Departed, which I really like. I've only seen it one time though, so I need to rewatch it. But that's the only one that won him Best Picture. And a lot of people think that it's not necessarily his best movie, but it just came out at a time where there weren't that many other movies that came out, so it was his time to win. Casino's really good, and then another one I had was Gangs of New York, which has its problems, but Daniel Day-Lewis's performance is so insane, and there's shots and elements of that film that are so unique and funny to me that I have to give it a mention.
Yeah, I only have one honorable mention. I think I've seen less Scorsese movies than you. But my one honorable mention gets a lot of hate is Shutter Island. I think this one has a lot of like predictable, maybe even melodramatic, overdone aspects to it that you can easily like poke holes in. It's another one of those like unreliable main character type of movies. Leo again. I saw this in theaters when I was in high school because I think it was a Leo thirst watch with like one of my high school girlfriends, and like it really didn't disappoint. Like, I forget Mark Ruffalo is in this. Yeah, it's like a great like psychological thriller in my opinion. And I think like rewatching it, if you forget the twist, it holds up pretty well. There's definitely some really like gut-wrenching moments in this, I think, but it kind of plays out like a pulpy detective novel, like psychological novel. There's a little bit of it that feels a little bit M. Night Shyamalan almost. Not as much Scorsese. But yeah, it's my only honorable mention.
Yeah, and then just a few that I haven't seen. I haven't seen Raging Bull yet, which I know is one of his more popular ones. Just haven't gotten around to it. And then I haven't seen King of Comedy.
That's probably the one I want to see the most.
I thought The Irishman was it was really boring. I couldn't get into that one.
I think the only other one I really want to see still is The Age of Innocence. Would be the other one of his that I would see. Another one that I know I want to see at some point, Bringing Out the Dead. Just Nick Cage.
Yeah, I need to see that one as well.
I think those are the main ones that we haven't seen we'd still like to see.
All right.
Thanks
for listening.
Bye.